You're listening to The Secrets of Star Trek, where we discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings found in all the Star Trek TV, series, movies, and more. And today we're discussing the Deep Space Nine first season episode, The Storyteller. I'm Dom Bettinelli, and joining me today on the panel are Father Cory Sticha. Hey, Father Cory.
How's it going?
And Jimmy Akin. Hey, Jimmy.
Howdy, Dom.
Folks, be sure to share the podcast with your friends. Help us grow this community and reach more listeners with our fine content. And speaking of fine content, I want to tell you about another show on the StarQuest Network you're sure to enjoy called The Catholics of Oz. They are also Star Trek fans and talk much about Star Trek there. And so you want to check them out wherever fine podcasts are found or at sqpn.com/Oz. And I want to mention that we have a ton of listener feedback at the end of this episode from our recent discussion of Star Trek Picard, so I'll be sure to share that. Okay, and so this time we are talking about The Storyteller for this DS9 episode. Jimmy, can you give us a recap of what happens?
This week, Commander Sisko is negotiating a land dispute between two Bajoran peoples, one of which is led by a teenage girl who is determined to be an unflinching, inflexible leader. With some help from Jake and Nog, she learns how to become flinching and flexible, and she eventually comes up with a promising proposal to resolve the land dispute. Meanwhile, in the A-plot of this episode, Miles O'Brien and Julian Bashir have been summoned to a Bajoran village that is in grave danger. The grave danger is caused by the fact that a local spiritual leader known as the Sirah is dying, and only he can protect the village from a bad cloud special effect that appears for 5 nights at the end of every harvest. As he's dying, the Sirah appoints O'Brien as his successor and feeds him lines to drive off the cloud effect. But once he's dead, Miles has no idea how to do this again. Soon, the Sirah's former assistant, Hovath, who had failed at being the new Sirah, tells him and Bashir what's going on. The cloud effect is created by an orb fragment. Generations ago, the village was divided by hatred, and the first Sirah used the orb fragment to create the cloud monster and unite the village against it. But when Hovath failed to drive off the cloud a few nights ago, the people lost trust in him, and the Sirah picked O'Brien as his successor. Julian suggests that this was a ploy on the Sirah's part. He set up O'Brien for failure so that Hovath would have to save the day and the people would gain trust in him as the new Sirah. This is exactly what happens. As Miles fails miserably to drive off the cloud effect, Hovath rescues him and Hovath is hailed as the new Sirah. The end.
All hail the Sirah. So... I like it with a nice little Pinot. As I kept thinking every time I heard the name Syrah, the wine grape. So, first impressions, Father Cory?
There were stories that we've done where I wasn't impressed with the first time I saw it, but my later viewing proved this was not one of them. This is not one of them. This is... The story on the station of the negotiations was fine. It was a typical negotiation story where, one of the leaders needs to learn how to to actually negotiate, and that's fine. The whole storyteller thing was just bad. And as you said, Jimmy, bad cloud special effects and yeah.
How about you, Jimmy?
Well, it's definitely, to my mind, this has always been the It Shall Not Be Named episode of Deep Space Nine. And it's certainly one of the worst in Deep Space Nine. I don't know that it's the worst. And it's certainly not as bad as some, episodes in other series. Like this is not as bad as the last episode of Enterprise. This is not as bad as A Night in Sickbay in Enterprise. Mm-hmm. This is not as bad as the Warp 10 episode of Voyager, but it's not great. And the whole Sirah cloud monster thing is very contrived. Yeah. There are other obvious solutions like, hey, maybe you don't need the cloud monster anymore to keep the village united if you got rid of all the old rivalries. Maybe you can just stop using the orb chip to generate the cloud monster. Also, the Sirah is not the most. I know this is another planet with its own culture and stuff, but if you think about what the Sirah does, so he's cheating these people. he's making them think they're under grave threat from a monster when really he's in control of the monster.
Mm-hmm.
And he's extracting a cushy living from them and messing with their religious sensibilities. And they're giving him beautiful, nubile young women to sleep with.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So this doesn't make the Syrah seem to be the ideal wise guy. He seems like a cruelly exploitative creep.
Yep. So for me, a couple first impressions. One is this actually might have been a better story if the B plot was the A plot and the A plot was the B plot. And if you de-emphasized, made the storyteller thing smaller and just a funny interlude for O'Brien's uncomfortable situation, that might have worked better. So there's that. Apparently, this story was a pitch for Next Gen originally, and Michael Piller, one of the producers, kept bringing it out, and everyone kept saying no. And so finally, they let him do it for the DS9 first season, which they all should have just kept saying no. Apparently, it wasn't as bad as I remember in the one sense, which is I do like that this is the beginning of the O'Brien Bashir relationship.
Friendship. Yeah.
And so I do like that aspect. And O'Brien is funny in this one. He's dealing with this. He's a blue collar lunch pail guy being put into this situation. And that's a kind of a funny situation to begin with. And so I kind of enjoyed O'Brien's, uncomfortableness throughout. But you're right. There's all these other problems with it. One of the things I read about this story is that it's seen as being related to, is written kind of as being related to Rudyard Kipling's The Man Who Would Be King.
I didn't get that.
I guess
I don't know why.
I mean, so that story involves two British soldiers who go AWOL into this land in the Afghanistan area.
Kafiristan.
Yes, thank you. And end up conning their way into becoming kings and then getting exposed and expelled, which isn't what happens here. Yeah.
Not at all. Yeah.
Right. But more of the outsiders who would be king but don't succeed, or I guess. I don't know.
Or the outsiders that are used to get the guy who really should be the king to have the confidence to become the king.
Right. So one of the problems I find with it is that in the A plot, our characters are just along for the ride. Like the events happen to them. They don't really do anything. They don't solve anything. They don't fix anything. They're just there. The things happen and then they leave. And that's not a very satisfying story to build on. So it's kind of a, so I think that's one of the major flaws.
And it's implausible that, you've got all the stuff going on. You've got the wind, you've got the cloud monster, you've got the blinky lights that they see to defeat the cloud monster. And yet there's nothing that O'Brien can pick up on his tricorder. There's nothing that he can, it's just not there, basically, which means this is a mass hallucination.
Well, presumably it's because of the prophets that's why he can't pick it up on a standard Federation tricorder. This is all coming from an orb fragment.
Right, which all are beyond Federation technology to begin with, I guess.
So it's basically a mass hallucination.
Yeah. So Michael Piller's appeal for the story with his pitch was, sometimes we make our own monsters so we can defeat them and feel secure in our power, in ourselves, which again is not a very appealing premise to build on. So I think that's another part of the flaw.
No, and I've seen Forbidden Planet, and it was much better than this.
Exactly.
I was going to say, this sounds like a Discovery episode. Oh, by that pitch.
One of the interesting things I learned about this as I was looking stuff up. So in the B plot, we have this character Varys, and she's a young teenage leader of her people who she had become leader when her father died at the hands of the Cardassians, apparently. And she's being inflexible to show that even though I'm young, I'm strong like my father was, and you can't take advantage of us. And then there's this whole sort of teenage, romantic tension triangle going on with Jake and Nog and her.
And that was fine, Also, I like Varys's title. She's a tetrarch. And so tetros in Greek means four, and arche means chief, and so a tetrarch is a ruler over a fourth. And that's a real title. Some of Herod the Great's sons had the title tetrarch after he passed on to his reward. And so I like it when they pull in something from actual Earth history like that. However, the costuming is all wrong for Varys and her interlocutors. They're called her people are called the Paku, and there's this other people called the Navat. And Major Kira tells Sisko that there's this saying that the people are the land. And these people are from one of the harshest lands, so expect them to be really harsh people. And they're not. You got a rebellious teenage girl, and that's about it. But she's not even that bad. She's just kind of a jerk. And their costumes are all wrong. If they're like from, the Waziristan Badlands under Al Qaeda control or something, they shouldn't be waltzing around in pajamas like everybody else.
Yeah. The actress, by the way, actress who plays Varys was 23 when it's filmed. So she's much older than the Jake, the actor who plays Jake, and
Zurich Lofton.
Yeah. Although Aaron Eisenberg, who plays Nog, was also older than he played, so it's kind of funny to see that.
And that's pretty common in casting because kids are generally not good actors.
Right. So the dispute, I want to talk about the B plot first, and then we can go back to the A plot, but just get the B plot out of the way. The dispute is over this border. They have this treaty that says the border between our lands is the river, but the Cardassians diverted the river and gave the Paku, the Tetrarch's people, more of her neighbor's land. And the neighbors say, no, we want our land back. And she says, no, you can't have it. The border is the river.
Yeah, so it's like, dude, this is why you never use geophysical markers. You use geophysical coordinates.
Yeah.
Right. Because that's the thing is, what's your opinion? Should the border move with the river?
Well,
if that's what the treaty says?
Well, and here in the United States, they do use things like rivers as the borders between the states, but it's always specified of the location, the center of the river at this time.
Right.
So in 1875, when this state was established, where the center of the river was, that's where the border is. So then you get things like a little bit of, the state of Illinois is all on the east side of the Mississippi River, except one little enclave that's on the west side because of an earthquake where the Mississippi River flipped from one side of that town to the other. So that's a part of Illinois to this day, even though it's on the west side of the Mississippi River. And so that's how it's handled in the real world. And that's, that would be the easiest solution for this. Say, no, this is where the river was when the treaty was struck. This is our line, even if the river is now 20 miles or 20 kilometers inland. Right.
Yeah, I would agree. I can imagine being in that town. The river was over there. Now it's over there. How do we get to work? Yeah. So, and that's the thing is, the Mississippi notoriously wanders all over the place. So as of the date sign would be the logical way for Sisko to approach it. But the girl is willing to go to war, and he makes a good point with her, which is, you're willing to go to war, but what about all the people of your people who will die in a war over this? That's, you have responsibility for their lives.
In particular, she says, I'm willing to die for this. And his line is, which is commendable. I mean, at least it shows she's committed.
Yeah.
But he's like, are all your people going to be as committed to dying as you are?
Yes.
Over this.
Right. And then there's the whole thing with Nog and Jake, who, we've developed this idea that they're kind of these two boys on the station who are bored all the time and getting into mischief, mostly at Nog's instigation. As the father of young boys who are making friends with other kids in our neighborhood, I can feel for this. They get your kids involved in things like maybe, they're your friends, but not always loving the influence they have. So it was kind of interesting to see that. And then Nog is the one who notices Varys, the Tetrarch, and goes gaga for her. But Jake is interesting. At first, he's not interested at all. He's like, whatever, it's just a girl. It's, why are you getting so gaga? There will become a time later when Jake is the one who's gaga for a girl, and Nog is annoyed. So that will come.
Yeah, Jake's just more like, we'll be friends with her, but that's about it.
Yes, and they don't know who she is when they see her. She's just a girl walking around, and so they stalk her, and then ring the doorbell, or fight over ringing the doorbell. But then she opens the door, and they kind of just wander in. But they basically invite her to act like a girl, like a young girl, as opposed to leader of her people.
Yeah, because they say, like, hey, there's going to be a Klingon ship leaving for the Gamma Quadrant in a little bit. We can go watch the wormhole.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And she's never seen the wormhole.
But it's apparently it's the way Jake talks about his father that is what really makes an impression on her and leads her to being more compromising and more willing to listen to Sisko's promptings on how to negotiate.
Yeah.
And she kind of uses Jake at first because she goes, "Oh, Sisko, your last name is Sisko. I know a Sisko that I really need to learn more about. You can help me learn more about your dad." And this is, of course, to Nog's great annoyance. Let's stop talking about your dad.
Yeah. Well, by the way, we get our first instance in DS9 in this episode of Odo's bucket with the bucket prank. The bucket that was so prominent in Picard season 3, by the way. But Nog breaks into Odo's office, goes to steal his bucket, and then spills it all over Jake, filled with oatmeal instead of liquid Odo, which, kind of silly. But of course they get in trouble. Of course. Like, how is this not going to end badly? This is a bad situation. So, but in one sense, it's not so much Jake that provides the solution for Varys, but Nog with his rules of acquisition, the 9th rule, which is opportunity plus instinct equals profit. And that's where he encourages her to find the opportunity in this problem, which is actually a good solution.
Mm-hmm.
I like the way they play it out because she's talking about how these other people are insisting that she give up something that they want. And Nog says, so do they have anything that you want? And he's just immediately thinking in terms of we could make a trade. And he says this may not be a problem.
There is another point where Varys tells Sisko when she's being obstinate, you don't lose by saying no.
Oh, that was the worst speech.
Because that's not true.
Yeah. You had all this rhetoric about saying no and saying yes, and it's like, this has become too abstract and detached from the immediate situation, and we're just off in rhetoric land now. Yeah,
that was not great writing there. But so in the end, though, she gets... We get a solution and that sort of thing, and then she moves on, and we never see her again, which is fine. But to get back to the A plot, O'Brien and Bashir have been asked to go to this village. Bashir has been asked, and O'Brien is just being the driver of the runabout for him to. Because they've gotten this message that there's a terrible thing happening. So there's a sickness, and the village's very existence is at stake. So, we send the Federation doctor from DS9 because there are no doctors on Bajor.
Well, this is the Federation has the more advanced technology and all that kind of stuff routine. So
sure, O'Brien doesn't want to go, which is kind of an interesting... And what we've set up here is, so Brian still thinks of Bashir as this annoying, younger, obnoxious sort of guy.
Which he is. That's exactly how they're playing Bashir in these early seasons.
Yes.
Yeah.
But he's a superior officer, so he's going to, nod, say yes, sir. And
especially since Sisko is not putting up with O'Brien's excuses, like, you've got nothing going on, everything's working, go.
Father Cory, when you were in the Air Force, did you ever have a lieutenant who wanted to be buddies with the older enlisted guys who endured him because he was higher ranking?
You see that. And of course it goes the other way too. You've got enlisted that want to be buddies with lieutenants or whatever. But that usually doesn't work out too well.
That's what I was thinking.
And they definitely don't say, call me by my first name.
No. He does say, he knows, you can tell that Bashir knows he annoys O'Brien. And so he's self-aware enough there to know his social failings to some degree. But he's trying hard to be friends, and he just seems so young here. It's just kind of funny to see how young Bashir seems in this early seasons.
He's still like 28 or 29 in this episode. He turns 30 later on.
Right. Interesting that they beam down to the planet rather than just land the runabout outside the village. I'm not sure why that would be the case unless
that's
production.
That's why beaming was invented, so you don't have to land.
Right.
Yeah, I guess. I mean,
and that's probably where it shows that this came from a TNG episode, where they would have, in the TNG episode, they would have just beamed down from the Enterprise.
That's true. They had to get to orbit from the station. Yeah. So there was this assumption that there was a general sickness, but it turns out it's just one old man who's sick. And then there's this the village leader. I don't know. He just seems so clueless.
Yeah, as do the villagers in general. They're all a bunch of stock characters who are just very religious, very sincere, very wide-eyed, very innocent, very sycophantic. And it's like, it wasn't like this in medieval Europe. Even if you have a whole society that's religious, that doesn't mean they're all wide-eyed idiots.
Yep.
Right. Well, I mean, there's that. It feels like there's a little bit of that subtext here. Is like they're religious, being led astray by this religious con man who's using religion to con them. And it is kind of funny. The power of positive thinking is what drives the Dalrock away, basically.
Well, the negative thinking creates it, and the positive thinking chases it away.
Yeah. I wonder if we could make it. It's almost like a wag the dog sort of situation where you create a common enemy out of nothing in order to unite the people, essentially, which is never. It's actually it's a negative propaganda-ish thing. It's so. There is the little inconsistency. The Dalrock is a creature that lives in the woods, except it's a cloud in the sky. I thought that was a bizarre...
Yeah. And it never manifests itself except for 5 days at the end of harvest.
Yep.
Right. And why? I mean, does it just we need an annual reminder? And it's not just one day, but it's going to be 5 days?
It's the end of harvest, and everybody's cranky because of the harvest.
I
would prefer an Oktoberfest at that point instead of a big creature coming out, but
yes, Thanksgiving. So the old man dies, and he
after some really bad dialogue. So one of the things they communicate is you have, in order to deal with the Dalrock, you have to tell the story. Well, this is so the Sirach gets up and he tells the story, and it's the lamest story you've just about ever heard.
It's like a kid story.
It's lame for a kid story.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, the Dalrog is there and it hates us and it wants to destroy us, but we are strong. The village is strong, stronger than it can imagine. Okay, this isn't much of a story, dude.
Yeah.
Yes.
Actually, they kind of poke at that with having O'Brien try to tell it just horribly badly.
Once upon a time.
I except for the once upon a time line at the beginning, there's a little awkwardness to the beginning of O'Brien's rendition of the story. But he actually evens out, and he's not doing once he gets going, he's not doing markedly worse than the Syrah was. Not in terms of if you listen to what he says.
Right.
But it doesn't work for him because the plot needs it not to work for him.
Exactly. Yeah.
He doesn't have the power of belief.
Yeah. Also, we've got this, I could see based on what he says, once he gets going, I could see them going along with him and guess what? You're the new permanent Syrah. Because he's not just horribly incompetent in compared to the previous one. But then you've also got this assassinatey underling who just out of nowhere, I mean, he's resentful, and he out of nowhere decides to kill Miles, after which he tells him what's really going on. And suddenly he gains the ability to act in the final confrontation with the Dalrock. But again, it's very unmotivated. They show him slinking around, being a little resentful earlier, and then he suddenly leaps to homicide.
Mm-hmm.
What was his plan? Like, okay, I'll kill O'Brien, and then the village gets destroyed.
Yeah.
No, then he becomes the Syrah again, or whatever.
Yeah, well, except he doesn't think he can be, because the people won't accept him. And certainly they won't accept him if he's killed his predecessor, O'Brien. Yeah, that was weird.
I think that we're meant to understand that he realizes they won't accept him, that the village magistrate is correct. Once O'Brien is dressing him in the Syrah's robes, and the magistrate comes in and it's like, get out of those. You have no right to wear those. And he then realizes, yeah, they're not going to accept me.
Right.
Whereas they might have if only I'd killed O'Brien.
That's true. So we briefly mentioned how the villagers, once O'Brien is selected, they start bringing him all kinds of gifts, including
three
maidens.
young women.
That was disturbing. I'm sorry, but that was just that was disturbing. That was uncomfortable. A
come
mistake.
on, it's supposed to be wifey material. Of course, he already had a wife, but
right.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
I don't think they were meant to be wives. I think they were.
I was being sarcastic.
Okay. Because Bashir flags them as, I think they're the ones offering services.
Yeah, I mean, they come right out and say that. Like, wow, that's different time in the 90s. But it's interesting that O'Brien and O'Brien and Bashir don't just leave. Like, they're like, well, obviously something's wrong. Or call in reinforcements from DS9 or something. That they just kind of hang around, waiting for the situation to resolve itself somehow.
Bashir was too amused in the whole situation to begin with, so he wasn't going to leave. And of course, O'Brien has to follow his superior officer. So
yeah, I mean, he's trying to find out what's going on. Like, something clearly is happening. It's not just a hallucination. Something blasted those rocks, and that sort of thing. So. The other interesting is this is first season still, and here's another instance of Bajorans revering a Starfleet officer as a religious figure.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of feels like you shouldn't go to that well again so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
I think it demeans the Bajorans. It lessens them somehow. If it makes them seem gullible or superstitious. I like that later on in DS9 they take their beliefs more seriously, but here,
it kind of falls into the bad anthropology of the late 1900s and early 2000s, where it was, or 19th century, 20th century, excuse me, where the white man was the savior and stuff like that, and where they were worshipped is because they were more technologically advanced and that kind of garbage.
Yeah, this has the feel of some pretty condescending early 20th century anthropology.
Right.
Really, both with the A plot and the B plot.
Yep.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that maybe subconsciously makes me dislike this one as much as I do, just because it does have that. Because the Federation coming into Bajor as assistants, but not as superior savior syndrome, like imperial colony sort of thing. I don't know. I mean, that's one of the things that I didn't like about this anyway. So it's not the people's minds that bring the Dalrock, right? It's the
orb crystal.
Okay. Yep. And it's the Syrah who's behind it. So what happens if the people stop believing in the Dalrock, if they reject it as a real thing?
Well, I think it still keeps coming, because you've got, like, Hovath has the little orb fragment in that final confrontation with it. He summoned it.
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
And they make it sound basically it's like the negative emotions of the people are feed into the crystal, and that's what creates it.
Right.
So it's not belief in the Dalrock, it's the emotions of the people that cause it through the crystal.
This is one divided village. They must have had some really bad divisions there. Oh man.
Yeah, I think even if it were justifiable to enact this ruse, the time where it was justifiable would have long passed because the village is no longer being torn apart by rivalries and so forth.
Yeah.
In theory.
So any other last thoughts on the Storyteller, Father Cory?
So the old Sirrah, the one that died, might look familiar. He was Kate Cooter, who played the Cytherean, the floating head in the episode where Barclay becomes super genius and plugs into the computer.
Ah.
I mean, he's been in many, many other things. I mean, he was an actor that was all over the over the map.
Hierarchical command structure.
Yeah.
Cool.
But that's where Star Trek people would probably know him from.
Right. Cool. Anything else? That's it?
That's it for me.
Jimmy?
I like the description of the non-alcoholic beverage that Varys has ordered. Trixian bubble juice.
Yes. For the little lady. I am not a little lady. Splash.
And then it's like, I'm still charging her for that drink. It's like, of course you are. I would too.
Yeah, exactly.
She ordered a drink. She decided she didn't want it. She threw it at you. Minimum, she's getting charged for that drink.
Not double for making him wear it.
Yeah. But other than that, I'm glad it's over.
All right, good. We had been dreading this day, but now it has passed. Well, let's get to some listener feedback. I'm looking forward to that. And this feedback comes from our recent discussion of Star Trek Picard Season 3. I'm glad that I'm thankful that you're all patient with us as we catch up to your feedback. We got tons. And so let's get started with it. The first one comes from YouTube, where Martina wrote, I liked the Star Trek episode, but thought the script needed improvement in comparison to other older seasons, Voyager, Next Gen. By the acting, I'm guessing the actors might have thought so too, as their reactions weren't as smooth as usual. The best seemed to be at the end. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I certainly did think that the ending of the season, it just got better as it went, from my point of view. So.
Yep.
Our next comment comes from August on YouTube, who writes, thanks for these reviews. Picard Season 3 helped me fall in love with Star Trek again. I can only hope the powers that be will see what fans enjoyed and course correct the other shows accordingly. They better reuse that D set. Captain Riker series, anybody? In regards to Data's limerick, Robert Meyer Burnett, on his episode review, said that the rough cut he saw last year had Worf finishing the limerick, but Patrick Stewart had it removed because he didn't want a rude joke at the end of the series.
Good call.
Yes, right. Upcoming Blu-ray deleted scene, perhaps? Yeah,
well, I can do without knowing the rest of that limerick.
Yeah.
But you can use your imagination.
Exactly. Terry Matalas did say that the poker scene at the end, as the closing credits, that they actually filmed for like 45 minutes, and that likely will get released.
Oh,
that entire 45-minute, because it was them ad-libbing and playing,
Yeah, yeah. Nice. Cool.
I was, when I was growing up, the limerick that you always heard the first part of that would get interrupted was there was a young man from Nantucket.
Yeah.
Yep.
And I never knew. I mean, you'd hear that referenced on sitcoms and stuff on television, and they would always get interrupted.
Mm-hmm.
And I never, and there was no internet at the time. So I never knew what the completion of that limerick was. And then when I was in college, I was at the university movie theater and the film broke down and someone walked into the theater or something and said the full limerick. And it's like, oh, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm from Massachusetts, so apparently we know we learned that one younger. Yes. So it's all about rhymes. Our next...
There was a young lady named Bright, whose speed was much faster than light. She departed one day in a relative way and returned on the previous night.
No, very good. Thank you for cleansing our limerick palates.
Yes.
Keith Wood wrote in on YouTube, great show as always. Few thoughts, though. As far as the title, The Last Generation, I took it to mean the entire season involving the Borg, with the first episode being titled The Next Generation, i.e. the new biological instead of mechanical Borg, and the finale being the end of the line for the species. My other concern is why the Borg or her agents would destroy Starfleet Academy and all its potential Borg drones just to create a diversion. Seems that many students under the age of 25 would have been rather beneficial to them. And finally, a question. When you're watching/critiquing an episode and you see something wrong or contradictory, do you quietly make a note of it or, as I do, yell at the TV? Thanks again for a great podcast.
I quietly make a note of it, and if I feel really worked up, I boldface the note.
That's same here.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. I do, write it down, and if I'm really annoyed, then yes, I yell. Sometimes even pausing it. And, no, I don't do that. But one thing to point out, it wasn't Starfleet Academy that got destroyed. It was a recruiting station that got destroyed by the portal gun.
I think he might be referring,
but Space Dock.
Well, even more so, actually, I think he might have been referring to San Francisco when all those cities were targeted, and San Francisco's destroyed all of Starfleet. That's where Starfleet Academy is.
Except I don't think they ever pulled the trigger on destroying all those cities.
No, but why target it, I think, is the idea. So that's that.
Well, why target? I mean, just absorb half the human race anyway that's under 25.
Yeah. Right. That part was a little more, it's like in general, that was a little bit of a confusing.
Just all the cities were targeted. All the major cities were targeted. It was the point. I was thinking he was talking about, this comment was talking about the initial attack with the portal gun where they sucked the building in.
Oh, and yeah. If that were the case.
And that was a recruiting station. A big recruiting station, but a recruiting station.
Yep. Then our next feedback comes from Ryan via email, who writes, great episode. I wish it could have been 2 hours long. So now they need to release the Metallus cut. # release the Metallus cut. Live long and prosper. And thank you guys for entertaining us each week. That is a reference to the release the Nolan cut from the Justice League movie, which we eventually got. But I don't know if it would. I think it was fine. I don't think it would be better longer. I haven't seen anything online where Metallus has mentioned that things were cut at all. If anything, the Metallus cut would be taking those last 2 episodes like they did with the IMAX show. And put them together. Yeah.
And put them together as a movie.
Yeah.
Actually, it's supposed to be like a 10-part movie anyways, so the entire season was, so.
Right. And finally, Robert on YouTube writes, I agree that any Trek show that comes after Enterprise is limited to fans based on the fact that it's streaming only. I think what they need to do is after a season, 6 months or a year later, let networks pick it up to air.
I think that's what they're doing with Prodigy, because it's supposed to air on Nickelodeon. With some of the others, they're using variable length, which they'd have to, at a minimum, do cuts for to have commercial releases.
Also, I think you can, and I ran into this when I was trying to log into Paramount Plus on my computer. I think you can actually watch Picard Season 1 without for free if you're not a subscriber. Like, I think they were making some of the older seasons available for free as sort of a come on to, hey, subscribe and watch the new stuff. So you might want to check that out if you haven't seen Lower Decks or Strange New Worlds, maybe check those out.
Yep.
All right.
Yeah, then they have shown some of Prodigy on Nickelodeon already, although they haven't done the second half of the season yet.
Right. All right. So that's all our feedback. We appreciate all the feedback we receive. Thank you, everyone. And we'd like to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the Secrets of Star Trek, including Connor F., Tom W., Roger F., Derek V., and Thomas A. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the Secrets of Star Trek and all the shows at StarQuest, and you can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. We'd also like to thank Victor Lambs, who edited this episode. So that's it from us. We'd love to hear what you think of DS9's The Storyteller. You can let us know by commenting on the show at sqpn.com/trek, our Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia. Send an email to trek@sqpn.com or visit our Discord community at sqpn.com/discord. You can now watch The Secrets of Star Trek on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/StarQuestMedia, where we'd love to have you leave a comment, make sure you subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell to get notifications of new episodes. We'll be back next time when we'll be discussing the Voyager episode, Learning Curve. Until then, Jimmy Akin, thank you for joining me and sharing the secrets of Star Trek.
Thank you, and live long and prosper.
Father Cory Sticha, thank you as well.
Thank you, Dom.
And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the Secrets of Star Trek on StarQuest. And remember, once upon a time, there was a Dalrock.